Welcome back to iOS Expert. This is the Concurrency Crash Course. As the crash course part of the name implies, my goal is not to teach you everything you could possibly know about concurrency. My goals are more modest. First, I intend to show you some concurrency-related questions that come up in iOS job interviews and propose some good answers. Second, I intend to demonstrate practical application of concurrency using an app I developed for iOS Expert. Here is a concurrency question that sometimes comes up in interviews. After you read my proposed answer, I'll add some commentary on this answer. Although you can create threads manually, this is rarely done these days. Rather, threads get created on your behalf by the operating system when you use Grand Central Dispatch, Apple's battle-tested concurrency and parallelism library, also known as GCD, or Swift Concurrency, which is Apple's newer approach to concurrency and parallelism. Threads remain important to understand, however, because they lie at the heart of other concurrency concepts. Here is another concurrency question that comes up in interviews. As before, after you read my proposed answer, I'll add some commentary on this answer. To understand the importance of concurrency, it is helpful to understand what a world without concurrency would look like. Imagine a greatly simplified iPhone running two threads without concurrency. One thread is for a user-launched app, and the other is for displaying notifications. Initially, the CPU runs only the app thread. While the app thread is running, the notifications thread receives no CPU resources. This means that if someone sends an iMessage to the user gets no notification of that. This bogarting of the CPU results in a bad user experience. Now imagine the greatly simplified iPhone running the same two threads, but with concurrency. Every so often, the operating system causes the app thread to yield the CPU to the notification thread. Because the notification thread gets some CPU time, the user does get iMessage notifications while running the app. With modern operating systems, including iOS, concurrency happens, for the most part, transparently. That is, your app code and therefore thread don't need to constantly yield the CPU to other threads at opportune times. There are scenarios where explicit yielding may be appropriate, but those are beyond the scope of this crash course. Here is another concurrency question that comes up in interviews. As before, after you read my proposed answer, I'll add some commentary on this answer. To understand the benefits of parallelism, it is helpful to consider a world without it. Imagine an app whose purpose is to load 3 cat photos from a backend and display them in the UI. With no parallelism, all work occurs on CPU core 1. The photo loadings occur sequentially. This is wasteful of resources because cores 2, 3, and 4 are idle while photos are loading. Total time from initiation of the first loading to display of the 3 photos in the UI is 11 seconds. Now imagine that same app with parallelism. CPU cores 2, 3, and 4 each load a cat photo in parallel. Total time from initiation of the parallel loadings to display of the 3 photos in the UI is 5 seconds, a savings of 6 seconds. Deciding which core to put what task on would be difficult for you as the developer. But you don't need to do that. Instead, to perform work in parallel, you indicate, using GCD or Swift Concurrency, that you want work performed in parallel to the maximum extent possible, and the operating system does its best to use available cores. The app that I developed for this crash course demonstrates parallelism achieved via GCD and Swift Concurrency. Here is another concurrency question that comes up in interviews. As before, after you read my proposed answer, I'll add some commentary on this answer. Both GCD and Swift Concurrency provide mechanisms for preventing race conditions. The app that I developed for this crash course demonstrates them. Here is another concurrency question that comes up in interviews. As before, after you read my proposed answer, I will offer additional commentary about the main thread. As a developer, you must treat the main thread with caution. If your code runs some time-intensive task on the main thread, for example calculating 100 factorial, the UI will become unresponsive, resulting in bad user experience. User interface frameworks, for example UIKit and SwiftUI, are written with the assumption that all UI updates occur on the main thread. This means that if your code finishes some work on a thread other than the main thread, for example loading a cat photo, and you need to update the UI to display the photo, you must explicitly dispatch that work to the main thread. If you update the UI from a thread other than the main thread, the best case scenario is a runtime warning. The worst case scenario is an app crash. Both GCD and Swift Concurrency provide mechanisms for dispatching work to the main thread. The app that I developed for this crash course demonstrates these mechanisms. This crash course presents some aspects of support for concurrency and parallelism provided by GCD and Swift Concurrency. Be aware that my descriptions of both are not comprehensive. Also be aware that the combined framework exists and has extensive support for concurrency and parallelism. I have never seen a coding challenge that explicitly requires use of combine. If the description for a job you are interested in mentions combine, and you are not already familiar with that framework, take appropriate measures. To demonstrate these concepts, I have created two variants of an app inspired by Aoshima, an island off the coast of Japan where 6 humans and hundreds of cats live. The first tab of the app is for getting a census of cat breeds that live on the island. The app retrieves breeds from an endpoint. There is a button to load breed photos from an endpoint serially without parallelism. Japanese breed names are displayed within photos. Note that photo loading took 4.4 seconds. There is also a button to load breed photos in parallel. Note that this occurs more quickly, in just 0.6 second. The second tab of the app provides real-time data on the populations of 4 breeds of cat that live on the island. Nature takes its course, and these populations increase over time. There is a button to simulate 4 simultaneous adoption requests by would-be cat adopters. If a desired breed is available, a cat of that breed is subtracted from the current population of that breed. If a cat of the desired breed is not available, the would-be adopter is added to the waiting list. An adopter comes off the waiting list when a cat of her desired breed is born. You've been looking at the GCD variant of the app, Island Cats, but there is also a Swift Concurrency variant. In the next 2 videos, I will demonstrate, in both variants of Island Cats, thread safety, parallelism, respect for the main thread, and unit testing. You might be interested in only GCD or Swift Concurrency, so neither the GCD nor the Swift Concurrency video assumes that you have watched the other. Accordingly, there is some overlap between the two.